Story 1. My grandma was 12 in 1930. Whenever I was sick as a kid, she would make homemade cough syrup. It included a handful of elderberries, a handful of blackberries, and a handful of blueberries or pawpaws if she had them. These were boiled with a handful of peppermints, then strained into a mason jar half full of moonshine. I cannot remember coughing after drinking it, so I guess it worked. Story 2. You know rest, ice, compression, elevation for sprains and strains? Turns out it was based on faulty data. The person who originally popularized rest, ice, compression, elevation has now spent most of his career trying to undo the dogma. There isn't a catchy phrase for. You can use ice initially for pain relief, but then you should transition to gentle heat, do gentle stretching and movement or exercise as soon as you are able, and avoid elevating or compressing the injury instead of gentle exercise and movement, which will help more with healing. Story 3. My grandfather grew up in poverty less than 100 years ago. He had a tapeworm as a child, which affected his skeletal weight. An old wives' tale from a woman named Sally down the street told my great-grandmother that if she dangled a carrot down his throat, the tapeworm would come up, bite the tip, and she would be able to pull it out. Story 4. Growing up in Florida, I was always told to swim in the ocean if you have an open wound or cut because the salt water will cleanse and disinfect the wound. Now, you cannot go in the water if you have an open wound due to the fear of infection or flesh-eating bacteria. Story 5. My grandmother insisted goose droppings were good for styes, which are swollen bumps on the eyelid, but they might actually cause them. Story 6. People are still putting onions in their socks. Just because your feet caused the onion to rot does not mean imaginary toxins have left your body. Story 7. Blowing cigarette smoke in a child's ear to soothe an earache. Letting a dog lick your wounds to prevent infection. Packing a scrape with mud or dirt, though the logic behind this is unclear. Putting vodka or gin into a baby's bottle when teething, as I heard from my English friend. Cutting off warts with a sharp knife. I had this done by my father when I was 4. It hurt a lot and bled heavily, but the warts did not return. Story 8. Back when I was a child in the 1970s, the older residents in my area of the Delmarva Peninsula believed in using old, nearly white, completely dried-out dog feces as a remedy for toothaches and cavities. Specifically, they would find the oldest, driest piece possible and pack a portion of it into the cavity or affected area of the tooth. Even as a child, that did not make sense to me, and to this day I am proud to report that I have never had dog feces in my mouth. Story 9. I remember hearing beauty experts promote coconut oil as the secret to healthy hair and skin about 10 years ago. Even then, I cringed because my mom always put coconut oil in my hair when I was little to make my hair neat and my scalp less dry. A traditional method in my family's culture. I hated that because it smelled bad and did nothing except make my hair feel gross. I felt vindicated when dermatologists began advising against using coconut oil because it clogs pores. Story 10. Did you know that Coca-Cola used to have cocaine? This is one of the most overshared pieces of trivia ever, but nobody talks about how 7-Up contained medically significant amounts of lithium and was advertised with that as a selling point until 1948. Story 11. Appalachian here and mountain medicine is full of these remedies. For baby's colic, you could administer a rolled-up spider's web. For cough syrup, my mother would dissolve a Christmas-sized candy cane into bourbon. I still like that one. Update. When I woke up this morning, I was not expecting these comments to absolutely make my day. Plus, I am learning a lot. Story 12. Rubbing butter on a burn. I remember my grandmother swore by it, but looking back, it just seems like a recipe for disaster. Story 13. Does anyone remember getting covered with noxma after a sunburn? Story 14. My dad was raised by his grandparents. When he was a newborn in the early 1950s, his grandmother would soothe his gums with whiskey when he was teething. She would rub a little on his gums and put a tiny bit in his bottle. She tried to do the same to me in 1974, and my mother was very upset. Story 15. The use of mercury to treat various diseases, including syphilis, was common. Bloodletting, once considered a universal method for treating almost any disease, now appears extremely dangerous and ineffective. Story 16. I'm in my mid-40s. When my peers and I were babies in the late 1970s to early 1980s, It seemed fairly common among various European-influenced cultures to give upset or teething babies a rag dipped in heavily diluted spirits to calm them. My spouse, who is Polish, received vodka. I, being Canadian and British, Caribbean, received brandy. Two of my Irish friends received whiskey. It was also somewhat common until the early 1980s for doctors to suggest a pint of Guinness regularly to expectant mothers in the final trimester. Until the early 1990s, Guinness was also suggested for menstrual cramps. This would not happen today, obviously. Story 17. The idea of letting your wounds air out is now convincingly shown to make them worse by accelerating moisture loss and contributing to excessive scarring. Scabs were great when we had nothing else, but those were old times. Now, put a proper dressing on it. Story 18. Black salve. My dad is one of the people who believes in it. He tried to convince me to use it on anything skin-related, from bug bites to a staph infection. Story 19. My mom would apply hydrogen peroxide on all my cuts, and then I went on the internet and found out you are not supposed to do that. Story 20. I met someone born around 1955 whose mother insisted they eat a spoonful of vapor rub when they had a cold. Story 21. Cutting off long hair to preserve strength, especially if one had a fever. Shaving a patch of hair on the top of the head bald and applying a piece of brown paper soaked in oil to the spot to cure a cough. This practice dates back to the late 18th century and early 19th century, but it is unclear how long people continued doing it. People seemed to believe that hair growth was significant, and having too much could be a problem, especially for women. Early police officers carried a vial of smelling salts with them on their beats to help revive fainting people on the street. It was standard issue equipment like a truncheon. Story 22. Essential oils, crystals, prayer, and similar practices are still being used instead of real medicines. Story 23. Cocaine, laudanum, bleeding and purgatives. Putting butter or grease on burns. Using petroleum jelly or essential oils to smother ticks and make them release. It does cause them to release, but it also makes them regurgitate, which increases your risk of contracting any pathogens they were carrying. Story 24. People still do it. Do not urinate on jellyfish stings. Urine is not sterile and can cause the nematocysts that are not active to fire, causing more damage. Use hot water or vinegar. Even rinsing in salt water is better than peeing on your sting. Story 25. When my sister and I got sick, my Korean mother would tie a string on our finger, prick the tip with a needle, and then push the bad blood out. I hated it so much, especially since I knew it was not true at a young age, and my American father let it happen. Story 26. Drinking a child's urine. Though I am not sure how that ever seemed like a good idea. Nathan Fielder has a good documentary about this topic. Story 27. Ivermectin for coronavirus disease. People were clearing out their local veterinary hospitals and farm supply stores of an antiparasitic and using it like an antiviral. Can you imagine? Story 28. Paregoric was not folk medicine but an actual over-the-counter medication used by everyone, including children. It contained morphine and other ingredients such as anise oil, camphor, and benzoic acid. Story 29. I heard that my grandfather babysat me when I was an infant and filled a clean handkerchief with sugar soaked in bourbon to help me sleep, just like he did with my father when he was a baby. Story 30. We called my great-grandmother the potato witch. Got a sore throat? Eat a raw potato. Have a bruise on your foot? Rub a raw potato on it. Got warts? Rub a raw potato on them. Wrap that potato in an old dish rag and bury it during the new moon. Story 31. I have a friend who got a deep cut from falling off a mountain bike and had no medical kit, so they decided to rub some dirt in it because they had heard that in their childhood. When they finally got back to their hostel after a couple of hours, the wound was very infected. Story 32. People were always rubbing urine into things. Not even their own urine either. Story 33. Parapechinae or rebecking infants involved covering a sick infant in a special dough and leaving them in a preheated and then cooled oven. This practice was common among Russian peasants before the fall of the monarchy. Story 34. My grandmother believed you could bring a pimple to a head by holding beef fat on it. She also believed that any stitch sewn on Sunday would be picked out with your nose in hell. Story 35. My siblings love their red light therapy wand. The instruction manual shows the light can be used to treat a wide range of ailments, from migraines and depression to intestinal issues and warts. Story 36. The antimony pill is a metal pill made from antimony that you swallowed, supposedly to cleanse your system. Your family would sift through your stool to find and recover it to be used again. That's unpleasant, but it must have worked to some extent, or why all the trouble? Story 37. They used to literally blow tobacco smoke into the rectum. Story 38. Applying honey to wounds and properly bandaging them is an effective way to prevent infection. Honey has antibacterial properties and can prevent infection without causing tissue decay. Story 39. Trepanning, or drilling a hole into the skull to relieve pressure, comes to mind. Story 40. When I was a little kid in middle school, my mom bought these books called Firefox, which contain a plethora of remedies from Appalachia. I remember the one that grossed me out the most was for someone who had worms. The method called for the patient not to eat for a few days, then take a glass of milk. The worms would be attracted to the smell and eventually come up and out of the nose. Story 41. Veterinarian here. One story that stands out the most is from a friend who does a lot of work with the Amish community. She went out to examine a horse with colic, which is gastrointestinal upset. We always perform a rectal exam on colic cases, as it is an extremely useful diagnostic tool, especially in the field. Normally, you pull out manure. Sometimes, unfortunately, you feel distended intestines, which is not a good sign. That day, she pulled out an onion, completely intact and not digested at all. She was told it is an Amish remedy for colic. I joked that maybe it makes the colon cry and rehydrates a dry impaction, in which case, the joke is on me because I have been making this way harder than it has to be. Story 42. Use a black cat's tail to swipe across your eye if you have a sty or pink eye. Chewing tobacco on a bee sting. Using peroxide on cuts. Drying out a healing burn instead of allowing it to heal with wet-on-wet treatment or applying mustard or milk immediately after the burn. The effective remedy to minimize scarring for burns with wet-on-wet healing is using a hydrocolloid bandage and rinsing with lukewarm water for 10 minutes immediately after the burn occurs. Also, chickenpox parties are not recommended. Story 43. Rhino horn and elephant tusk are used to help with erectile dysfunction or to pretend it will increase penis size. These practices are still ongoing today. Story 44. All this reading, and I am coming to the conclusion that the United States desperately needs socialized healthcare. Your Appalachian folk medicine does not work. Tammy. You need to see a real doctor. Story 45. My grandmother told me menthol cigarettes were good for a cough. Story 46. I always think about how George Washington was treated when questions like this come up. I cannot wait for the day we can look back and say, they what? Poison people to cure cancer? What a bunch of idiots. Story 47. Essential oils for everything. I will grant you that some scents and oils can have soothing properties, and some can be a valid part of complementary medicine. But one needs to really question when multi-level marketing companies get involved. Story 48. I am just going to refer to the entire decade and catalog of the Sawbones podcast. Story 49. Cough syrup or a little alcohol can help babies sleep, although some people may still use these methods. Story 50. I worked in a nursing home that had assisted living. Basically, you received your meals, laundry, and medication, but you could come and go. We had a woman who woke up one day, fell out of bed, and had a stroke. She was told she would never walk again. We did not have a nursing bed available, so they placed her in her own assisted living room until one opened up. Her granddaughter stayed with her. She had her cook fresh potatoes every day with plenty of butter and salt. She wrapped her legs in hot mashed potatoes and hot wet towels every day and night for 2 weeks. She started to walk after the 16th day and continued to walk until she died 4 years later. True story. Story 51. I do not know, but there is still a church that advocates forcing children with autism to drink bleach. Story 52. Does using equine dewormer as a coronavirus disease 2019 preventative count? It is not that old. but it is certainly cringeworthy. Story 53. Did anyone else grow up getting a spoonful of honey for a cough instead of cough syrup, cold medicine, or cough drops? Warm milk with honey and lavender or chamomile to help you sleep better. Aloe for mild burns, ginger for an upset stomach, iodine for wounds, a cool cloth for a low-grade fever? Okay, fine. But what about putting drops of vinegar and alcohol in your ears after swimming? Anyone? I knew I was the only one who smelled like a pickle at the pool. Actually, I had a grandparent who was an old-school apothecary. We are talking really old school, like before World War II. Most of these remedies were administered by that grandparent. Overall, it was nothing over the top, in my opinion, and I have no lasting scars or damage. I do remember another elder suggesting putting butter on a burn I sustained once. I protested, saying that is not what my grandparent would do, and I would have none of it. When I get a cold or a cough, I still reach for honey. It may not work and may be a folk remedy, but it definitely tastes better than most cough drops. Who am I kidding? I still do most of this except for the iodine thing. That stings. Story 54. Bayer was selling and marketing heroin, also known as diacetyl morphine, about 100 years ago as a cough suppressant. Story 55. It seems so unusual to me that not long ago, and I believe even now, parents would send their children to someone else's house to spend the night when they had chickenpox. I understand the reason, but it feels surprising how recent this practice has been. Story 56. My aunt used to babysit me, and whenever I bumped my forehead, she would rub the spot with toothpaste and stick a penny on it. I have never met anyone else with a similar experience and still have no idea what possessed her to do it. Story 57. Vinegar bath to soothe sunburn. It worked, just smelled unpleasant. Story 58. When I was a child and had ear infections, my mother would make a hot onion poultice to apply on it. I casually mentioned this to my wife once, and she kind of freaked out and told me my mother is insane. Story 59. I don't know if you are like me. I have been a doctor for a long time and have seen many trends come and go. When you come to me excited about your new rectal coffee cure or whatever, it is both exhausting, annoying, and funny all at the same time. An operating room technician told me the other day that she had been watching on TikTok, where some guy was advocating drinking your own urine, which is an old idea. Gandhi was said to drink his own urine. I laughed, of course, but she kept mentioning all the many health benefits she was really interested in. Ultimately, I had to cut the conversation short. Okay, but don't drink your own urine. I am literally a urine doctor. Don't drink your own urine. Okay. Just as long as you aren't drinking your own urine. Sheesh. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.